This presentation will cover some of the cost-related enhancements that E2B Technologies has created for the MAS 500 manufacturing modules. These enhancements include the ability to calculate labor and overhead for routing steps based on factors other than machine hours, the ability to override the standard item cost for routing material and outside processing steps, the ability to calculate the standard labor cost for routing labor steps based on multiple operators, the ability to display the standard labor run cost as a separate factor by updating the fixed setup bucket with the calculated amount, the ability to override a general ledger segment for manufacturing transactions, the ability to process bill of material regeneration on an as-needed basis, the ability to change the step complete checkbox on work order steps, and the ability to reverse a material issue to a work order even though quantities may have been progressed. The first enhancement we will look at is the ability to calculate labor and overhead for routing steps based on factors other than machine hours. Metal processing and rubber molding are good examples of products that require time to process but doesn't relate to an hourly application of labor and overhead. Setup for this enhancement is done in the Setup Work Center screen. Check the box to use quantity-based costing and enter the unit of measure label that will be displayed in a routing labor step that will use this work center. Then enter the work in process hourly rates as you normally would for fixed and variable run, fixed and variable setup, and the run and setup labor rates. Setup calculations will not change with this enhancement, but the WIP run rates will be applied to the defined cost factor. The routing step will define the parameters for the calculations. First, enter the Work Center ID, in this case HT for heat treat. Then in the new field, enter the quantity for the step cost calculation for the Work Center label defined in the Work Center. The cost calculations performed during bill of material cost roll-up for the step will be for fixed run, pounds per piece times the work center fixed run cost. In our example, that would be 10 times $20. The total cost would be $200 for the fixed run element. For the variable run, it will be pounds per piece times the work center variable run cost plus the run labor cost. In our example, that would be 10 times $10 plus $8, or for a total cost for that element of $180. When we look at the bill of material cost roll-up report, we can see that the cost calculations for step 50 of the routing shows fixed run cost of $200 and variable run cost of $180. All other labor steps have been calculated using the normal convention, whereas the heat treat step has been calculated based on weight in this case. Labor entry for the work center step is entered the same, with quantity and time, but the cost is calculated based on the quantity entered for the cost factor, in this case pounds per piece. The work order step inquiry screen displays the cost for the production entered. Here's step 50 for heat treat. We can see that the production cost is 10 pounds times $380, or $3,800 is the run-to-date actual cost. If the labor step is backflushed, the calculation uses the E2B cost factor, the same as when labor entry is entered directly to the step for production. As you can see in the bill of material cost roll-up report, the cost for chrome plating is now $200, which represents the override cost. Note that when the purchase order is created for plating, the price must be manually entered to match the routing step override, even if auto issue is used. Now let's look at the cost override enhancement. This enhancement was created for those manufacturing, material, or outside processing steps that require an override of the standard item costs defined in the maintain inventory record. Outside processing is a good example of this, where an item is created for plating, but the cost for plating each item is different based on size and weight. This enhancement allows the cost override in the routing step to adjust for the cost of plating this particular item. In this case, the standard cost for chrome plating in the maintain inventory record is $100, but the cost reflected in the bill of material cost roll-up is $200, as changed in the cost override. The cost override dollar amount entered replaces the inventory item standard cost in the cost calculations. The work order step also displays the cost override dollar amount. If the outside process item has a valuation method of actual, average, FIFO, or LIFO, then the work order details will show again the $2,000 standard and the $2,000 actual that have been applied against the work order. If the outside process item has a valuation method of standard, then the work order details would reflect an actual cost of $1,000 because the item was processed into inventory at standard with a purchase price variance created at PO receiving. So as you can see, this enhancement works only really well for valuation methods other than standard cost. Now let's look at manufacturing crew rates. This enhancement was created for those manufacturing labor steps that require multiple operators. Standard MAS 500 includes an operator factor on the labor step of the routing, however costing does not use this field. Now this option is controlled in the enhanced manufacturing setup record. Check the option to use operator factor. After the PO receipt is processed and updated to the work order, the standard and actual cost is reflected in the work order cost inquiry view. Here we can see the standard cost of $2,000, which is a quantity of 10 times $200 for chrome plating, so the standard cost is $2,000, and the actual cost, which comes from the purchase order receipt, is also $2,000. The crew size is defined in the routing labor step. The operator factor equals the number of operators for the step, and in this case, hours per piece is selected for the method, and 1 hour is the standard for performing this particular step. The labor and overhead rates are defined in the work center table. In this case, we only have a fixed run rate or fixed overhead of $20 per hour, and the labor rate is $10 per hour. Next, let's look at the manufacturing labor cost breakout. This enhancement was created for those manufacturing companies that would like to see labor cost as a separate field and do not need to use fixed overhead for setup in routings and work orders. Standard MAS 500 manufacturing combines the direct labor cost with the variable run cost. This option is controlled in the enhanced manufacturing setup record. Just check the option to use fixed setup bucket for labor cost breakout. This option also allows the labor cost to be posted to a separate GL account as it is absorbed in the manufacturing process. This is controlled through the Setup Manufacturing Item Classes screen for the GL account defined for absorbed fixed setup. Because our labor is now going to be posted into the fixed setup field, the GL account defined here will get the credit for the dollars posted. Looking at the bill of material cost roll-up report for our routing, we can see that step 20, which is our saw operation, reflects a fixed overhead cost of $20, which represents 1 hour times the rate of 20. When we look at the variable cost, in this case, that's strictly labor because we had no variable overhead defined. So it took the $10 per hour times 2 operators and reflects a cost of $20. Labor cost for posted labor transactions is now displayed in the work order fixed setup column. This separates the labor from fixed and variable overhead. The next cost enhancement we'll talk about is the GL override by manufacturing department. This enhancement allows an override of a general ledger account segment for manufacturing transactions. The segment is defined in the Setup MF Options screen right here where it says Account Override Segments, and you can look up and select the particular segment that you want to override. The override segment ID is defined in the manufacturing department screen where it says Division. This will be the value that will default for that GL segment. In this scenario, the setup MF item classes can be set up with zeros in the segment that we're going to default. The value will default from the department setup. When manufacturing labor transactions are updated to the general ledger, you'll see the second segment here has defaulted to the ID we defined in the department table. The next enhancement is the Auto Bill of Material Regeneration program. The Bill of Material Regeneration utility now has an option to regenerate bills of material only as needed. Just select Regen All Needed Routings. A modification to the Bill of Material Regeneration utility now tracks changes made to component routing and bills of materials and only regenerates the routing and bills of material for parent items that reference the component routing. A SQL job is also available to run the regeneration on user-defined schedules. Without this capability, all routings in the database must be regenerated, which can be very time-consuming. Just select Proceed to continue with the Bill of Material regeneration. You'll see it's completed already, which is a very fast process. The next enhancement we'll look at is the Material Issue Reversal. Beginning in Sage Mass 500 version 7.0, reversal of material issues are prevented if quantities have been progressed since the original quantity is no longer available to reverse. If the original material, quantity of material or lot for the material was incorrectly entered during the original material issue, the user cannot reverse the original transaction to correct the problem. The E2B Enhanced Costing module allows the reversal, even though progress has been posted for the work order. Simply select Reverse, and you can now reverse that transaction and re-enter it correctly. The last cost enhancement we're going to cover is the ability to use the work center labor rate instead of the employee rate when posting labor against a work order. The checkbox in the Enhanced Manufacturing Setup screen controls this function. Here's the checkbox.